The sun hung low in the sky, casting long golden shadows over the dirt-ridden yard. The dog lay in the corner, barely moving. His fur, once sleek and shining, was now a dull, patchy mess. The matted patches on his body were covered with deep red, irritated sores, raised and inflamed from relentless scratching. Fleas, ticks. He could feel every bite, every crawl, every painful itch as it gnawed deeper into his skin. He wasn't just covered in the bumps that dotted his fur. He was consumed by them. The weight of his suffering hung in the air, silent but suffocating. His ribs jutted out from under his tattered coat, the gauntness of his body a testament to how long he had been left to battle this alone. His once bright eyes, filled with hope and energy, were now dull and lifeless, a faint shadow of the dog he had once been. Each breath came with a wheeze, his body too weak to fight the infection eating him alive. He didn't know how long he had been out there, abandoned, forgotten. All he knew was the pain, the hunger, and the gnawing itch that consumed him. His world had become a blur of suffering until the rustle of footsteps interrupted his trance. He lifted his head just enough to see a woman standing before him, the first human he had seen in days, maybe longer. She knelt slowly, not rushing, not coming too close, sensing his fear. For a moment, neither of them moved. The woman hesitated, her heart heavy with the sight of him, knowing that the battle she was about to face wouldn't just be physical. It would take every ounce of patience, compassion, and care she could muster. But her voice, when she spoke, was soft. "We're not alone anymore," she whispered. "I'm here." The field stretched out in all directions, a quiet, desolate expanse of overgrown grass and dirt, suffused with the heavy, stagnant air of the late afternoon. In the midst of it all, barely noticeable, was a small figure. Barely moving, barely breathing. Max, a once strong and confident German shepherd, lay crumpled in the tall grass, his body limp and broken. His eyes, clouded and dull, flickered briefly at the world around him, but it was clear that he no longer had the strength to engage with it. The life he had once known had slipped away, faded into memories of running, playing, of being loved. But that was no longer his reality. His fur, once thick and shiny, was now a tangled mess of dirt, matted patches and raw sores. Fleas and ticks had taken residence on his body, burrowing into his skin, feeding on his blood. His flesh was swollen in places where the insects had ravaged him, leaving welts and irritated patches of skin, broken and exposed to the sun. He had been fighting against them for as long as he could, but the battle was no longer a matter of survival. It was simply one painful moment after another, with each breath feeling more laborious than the last. His body, once a picture of health and vitality, had become a hollow shell. He could feel the parasites feeding on him, gnawing at him, draining his energy. The ground beneath him felt hard and unforgiving. He lay on it, motionless, too weak to even lift his head. The field, once a place he could roam freely, had become his prison. The tall grasses that surrounded him offered no comfort. They were just as cold and unyielding as the world that had left him here. The earth itself seemed to mock him, pressing down on him, making it harder and harder to breathe. Max had once known the warmth of a loving hand, the comfort of a soft bed, the joy of running across a yard. He had been a pet, a companion, a friend to someone, somewhere. And now all of that seemed so distant, so far removed from the creature lying here in the field. He couldn't remember the faces of the people who had once cared for him. The memories had faded, replaced by an overwhelming sense of loneliness and hunger. No food had come for days. No water, no warmth, just the relentless heat of the sun beating down on his fragile body. Every instinct in Max's body screamed for him to get up, to run, to escape the pain. But he didn't have the strength. His limbs were weak, trembling under the weight of his suffering. Even the act of lifting his head felt impossible. His once proud body had become a prison, bound by the torment of his condition. He had learned to accept the pain. It was a part of him now. Just as the parasites were, just as the hunger was, they had become his companions, and it felt as though they were all he had left. Time had lost its meaning. Max had no way of knowing how long he had been in the field. Days, perhaps weeks. His body had become numb to the passage of time, dulled by the constant ache that filled every inch of his being. There was no rhythm to the day anymore. No sunrise or sunset to mark the hours. There was just the pain, the isolation, and the relentless itch of the parasites feeding on him. The world beyond the field no longer mattered to him. His only focus was the immediate need to survive, to find the strength to push through one more minute, but then something shifted in the air. The faint sound of footsteps reached Max's ears, distant, barely noticeable, but they cut through the fog of his suffering. He stirred slightly, his eyes blinking open, though it took all his energy to lift them. A shadow appeared at the edge of the field, moving toward him. At first, Max thought he was imagining it. It was a fleeting thought, a mirage in the haze of his exhaustion. But the shadow grew larger, closer. It was a figure, human, tall, and moving with purpose. Max's body tensed instinctively. Fear flooded his senses. It had been so long since a human had approached him, and the memories of being abandoned here, of being forgotten, stirred within him. He had learned not to trust, not to expect help. He had seen too many humans walk away without a second glance. He wasn't important to them. He was just another stray, just another casualty of the world's indifference. But this figure didn't walk past. This time the humans stopped. They didn't move away. They didn't look at him with the same cold, indifferent eyes he had grown used to. No, this figure knelt down slowly, bringing themselves to his level, their eyes never leaving him. The woman's movements were slow, deliberate, and Max could sense the difference. There was no rush, no urgency. She wasn't trying to push him away or force him into something. She was just there, present, soft, and unafraid. Max's body trembled as the woman reached out her hand, slowly, gently, offering it to him. It was an invitation, a promise. She didn't come closer at once. She gave him the space to decide. Max's instincts screamed at him to flee, to get away from the hand, to retreat into the silence and isolation he had come to accept. But something in her gaze made him hesitate. She looked at him with something else, something he hadn't seen in a long time. Compassion. And for the briefest moment, Max felt a flicker of something deep inside him, a tiny spark of hope. Her voice was soft, a whisper carried on the wind. "It's okay," she said. "We're not alone anymore." Max didn't know if he could trust her words. He had learned not to. He had been let down too many times before. But her presence was different. She didn't reach for him with desperation or force. She simply waited. Max's body, stiff with fear, began to relax just slightly. He didn't pull away. He didn't push her hand away. He allowed himself to stay where he was, just for a moment longer, to see if this was real. And in that moment, everything changed. Max didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if this woman would truly help him, or if she would turn away like all the others had. We others had. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Max allowed himself to hope. For the first time, he didn't feel completely alone. There was a possibility, however small, that things could be different now. The woman's hand remained extended, waiting for him to come closer. Max didn't move at first, but something in her steady presence made him feel safe, even if just for a moment. She was offering him something he hadn't had in so long: kindness. And it was that kindness, that warmth, that would set the stage for everything to come. Max's body had been through unimaginable suffering, yet somehow the touch of the woman's hand, the first true touch he'd felt in what seemed like forever, felt like a lifeline. The moment she touched him, a part of him wanted to pull away. His instincts were sharp, ingrained from years of neglect, and every fiber of his being screamed at him to retreat into the corner of his mind, the dark corner where no one could reach him. But the woman's hand was gentle, kind, and her presence wasn't invasive. It was an offering, a quiet promise. For days after he was found in the field, Max lay in the corner of the room that the woman had set aside for him. She called it his bed, though to him it felt just like another place to wait, another corner where he could hide. Her gentle touches had been few and far between, each one tender but not enough to push through the armor of distrust that had built up over the years. He had learned long ago that humans weren't to be trusted. They had left him, abandoned him to a life of suffering. His experience had told him that the world was cold, and he couldn't rely on anyone to keep him safe. Max hadn't known real care in so long that he wasn't sure how to respond to the woman's attempts. She had brought him food that Max couldn't even begin to comprehend as a sign of kindness at first. He had eaten it out of necessity, but there was no joy in it. His body was weak, malnourished, and though the food nourished him, it did little to heal the deep, unseen scars in his heart. His body wanted the food, but his mind and soul had become numb to the idea of nourishment, both physical and emotional. Every time she came near him, Max instinctively shrank away. His muscles tensed, his body stiffened, and he would curl up tighter as though he could hide from the world. The woman never pushed, never tried to force her presence on him. She understood that trust wasn't something you could demand. It was something you had to earn, patiently, gently. But the tension in Max's body slowly began to melt. It wasn't a sudden change, but over time she noticed him relax just a little when she entered the room. His eyes would soften, and though he still flinched if she made any sudden movements, he didn't retreat as quickly as he had before. He would glance at her, and for a brief moment she could see a flicker of recognition, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. The woman was careful too. She didn't rush him, she didn't pressure him to be something he wasn't ready to be. Her patience became his greatest ally. Each day she spent with him was filled with quiet moments. She sat on the floor next to him, just watching him, her presence calm and unwavering. She would speak to him softly, telling him stories about her day or simply sitting in silence, letting him become comfortable with the rhythm of her life. She didn't expect anything from him, and that, more than anything, allowed Max to begin letting his guard down. But the breakthrough came in a moment that seemed so small it could have been overlooked, if not for the significance it carried. One evening, as Max lay on his bed, his body still stiff with apprehension, the woman approached him slowly, holding out her hand. She didn't rush. She didn't force him to come closer. She simply allowed her hand to hover near him, just within reach, and waited. Max's heart raced as he watched her. His instinct was to shy away, to run, to hide from the human touch that had so often been a source of pain. But something in her hand, the way she held it, soft and steady, calmed him. He didn't understand it at first. Why was she offering him this? Why was she trying to get close? But the warmth in her hand, the absence of any sharp movement, felt different. This wasn't a demand for anything. This wasn't an attempt to control him. This was simply an offer, an invitation to trust, to heal. Max hesitated for a long time, every inch of his body screaming to retreat, but his mind, exhausted from the constant vigilance, made a choice. He leaned forward just slightly. His nose touched her fingers, a tentative brush against the skin of her hand. The moment his fur met her touch, he tensed, but he didn't pull away. It wasn't much, a mere brush, but to Max, it felt like a massive shift. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone had reached out to him without hurting him, without abandoning him. The touch was not a threat, it was a comfort. It was healing. The woman didn't say anything. She simply let Max take his time. She stroked his fur slowly, gently, giving him the space to process the touch, to accept it on his own terms. Max's body trembled, and he couldn't stop himself from flinching at the unexpected warmth of her hand, but he stayed where he was. He didn't pull away. Slowly, very slowly, his muscles relaxed. He could feel the weight of his own anxiety start to lift as she continued to pet him, each stroke a message, soft and steady, that he was safe. The moment stretched on. It wasn't a grand, dramatic event, but to both of them it was monumental. For Max, it was the first real connection he had experienced in so long, a quiet reassurance that not all hands would hurt him, not all people would leave him. For the woman, it was a sign that Max was beginning to trust her. A small but significant victory in a long, arduous journey. She knew that healing would take time, but this small act, this first touch, was the beginning of everything. Max began to relax more with each passing day. He still had his moments of fear, of retreating when the world became too overwhelming, but the bond between him and the woman deepened. Every touch, every gentle word, every act of patience brought him closer to the peace he had been denied for so long. As the days turned into weeks, Max began to trust more fully, allowing the woman to pet him without hesitation. He still flinched at the unexpected sounds of the outside world, but now, when the woman reached out to him, he leaned into her touch. He had learned that not all hands were to be feared, that some hands could offer comfort, care, and love. Each time Max accepted her touch, he was taking a small step toward healing. It wasn't just his body that needed to recover. It was his heart, his spirit. His soul had been battered, bruised by the neglect, and the healing of that wound was slow, painstaking. But with each touch, each word, each moment of tenderness, the woman helped him piece himself back together. And so the days passed. Max's trust grew, and with it, his willingness to open up to the world once again. It wasn't a fast process. It wasn't without setbacks. But each day he took one more step. And with each of those steps, he found himself getting closer to the dog he was meant to be. The dog who could trust, who could love, who could live again. Max had come a long way since the day the woman first found him in the field. His body was no longer frail and broken. It was regaining its strength. His fur, once a patchy, dirty mess, now gleamed with health, thick and shiny. The sores and swelling on his skin were beginning to heal. He was eating regularly, drinking water without hesitation, and even starting to enjoy short walks around the yard. But despite the progress he had made physically, there was a deeper layer of healing that still remained, one that went beyond his body, a healing that no amount of food or medicine could cure. It was the scar that ran across his heart, a wound caused by the neglect and abandonment he had suffered for so long. The fear Max had felt when he first arrived at the woman's home, his instinct to flinch away from every touch, every movement, hadn't entirely disappeared. While his physical condition had improved, the emotional walls he'd built around himself were still strong. He was still cautious, still unsure whether he could fully trust this woman who had brought him into a home and was caring for him in ways he hadn't thought possible. There were moments when his body would stiffen at the sound of a car engine or when someone knocked on the door too loudly. The fear of abandonment, of being left alone again, still had a tight grip on him. The woman could see the conflict in his eyes, even as he began to act more comfortable in her presence. He would follow her around the house, sit near her, but always with an air of uncertainty, a hesitance to fully commit. He would sit beside her on the couch, his head resting on her lap, but he never fully relaxed. His muscles remained taut, his gaze alert. He was still waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the betrayal he feared would come. The love she gave him, though steady and unwavering, was not yet enough to erase the deep-rooted fear of being abandoned once again. One evening, after a particularly stressful day for Max, when the noise of a thunderstorm had sent him into a frenzy of fear, the woman sat beside him on the couch, gently stroking his fur. Max was trembling, his body tight with anxiety, and she knew he needed more than just comfort. He needed to feel safe. He needed to know that this wasn't a temporary arrangement, that she wasn't going to leave him like everyone else had. "Max," she whispered softly, her voice gentle yet firm. "You are safe here. I'm not going anywhere." She had said this to him before, but this time something in her voice, in her touch, was different. It was the first time she truly allowed herself to acknowledge what she had been feeling too. She wasn't just caring for him because he was sick or injured. He was sick or injured. She wasn't simply going through the motions of a rescue. She was committed to him. She had made a promise, not just to herself, but to him, that she would give him the love, trust, and care he had been denied for so long. Max looked up at her, his eyes filled with something more than fear. There was a flicker of something else. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was the faintest trace of trust. For a moment, he didn't pull away when she reached out to stroke his head. He didn't flinch. He didn't look at her with suspicion or hesitation. Instead, he allowed her touch to comfort him. His breathing slowed, his muscles finally relaxing under her hands. And for the first time in his life, Max realized that he didn't have to fight anymore. He didn't have to be afraid. He could just be. The woman too allowed herself to believe in the change that was happening in Max. She had been patient with him, giving him space when he needed it, but this moment felt like a breakthrough. She had never pushed him. She had let him come to her at his own pace. At his own pace. And now she could feel him finally starting to let go of the walls he had built around himself. The walls that had protected him from the pain of abandonment, but had also kept him from fully living. The next few days were filled with quiet victories. Max's fear still lingered, but it no longer controlled him. He began to engage with her more, coming closer when she called his name, following her through the house, sitting next to her without pulling away. He began to trust the routine, the safety of his new home. When the doorbell rang, he no longer darted for cover. When the woman moved too quickly, he no longer shrank away. He was beginning to understand that not all humans were the same, that this woman wasn't going to leave him, wasn't going to hurt him. The walls that had once kept him trapped in a world of pain and isolation were beginning to crumble, brick by brick, replaced by a sense of security, of belonging. But there were still moments of setback. A loud noise would make him jump, or he would retreat to his bed when someone outside the house would raise their voice. The road to recovery was not linear, and Max still had a long way to go. But the woman, with her quiet patience, her unwavering commitment, continued to guide him through the darkness. She never pushed him too hard. She simply let him take the time he needed. One evening, as Max sat by the window, watching the world outside, the woman sat beside him. It had been a particularly rough day for him, one filled with storms and strange sounds, and she could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He had come so far, but the trauma of his past still haunted him. He wasn't ready to leave all the pain behind just yet, but that was okay. She was ready to take it slow. They would go at his pace. "Do you want to go for a walk?" she asked gently, her voice low, filled with the same calm assurance she had used since the moment they had met. Max's ears perked up at the word, walk. He had begun to associate that word with freedom, with new experiences, with something beyond the confines of the house. But he hesitated. His tail, which had been wagging slightly, slowed. He wasn't sure he could do it. He wasn't sure the world outside would be any safer than the field he had been left in. But when she gently extended her hand toward him, he didn't pull back. He stepped forward, just slightly, before looking up at her. The woman smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "It's okay," she said softly. "You will take it slow, just you and me, one step at a time." Max took that first step forward, and though it was tentative, it was a step nonetheless. And as they moved through the front door and into the yard, Max found himself not just walking, but breathing in the cool evening air. His body relaxed for the first time in what felt like forever. This was the beginning of something new, something he had never dared to believe possible, a life of peace, trust, and love. Healing, as Max was beginning to understand, was not a straightforward path. The woman had watched him slowly gain strength, his body becoming fuller, his steps more assured. His coat was beginning to regain its sheen, and his eyes, though still cautious, held a spark of curiosity. It was impossible to ignore how far he had come, how much more comfortable he was around her, how the rawness of his initial fear had slowly been replaced with the gentleness of a dog who was learning to trust again. But for all the progress he had made, there were still moments when the shadow of his past would grip him. It was in the way his body would stiffen when the sound of a car engine would roar by too fast. It was in the way his eyes would widen at the slightest noise outside the house, as if expecting the world to come crashing down again, as it had so many times before. It was in the way his tail would tuck between his legs whenever anyone raised their voice, even in kindness, even with no intent to harm. There were cracks in his healing, cracks that ran deep beneath the surface, and sometimes those cracks would reopen with force, bringing all of Max's old fears rushing back. The woman noticed the shift one afternoon as they sat in the living room. Max had been lying beside her as usual, his head resting on her lap, his body relaxed in the way he had learned to trust over the weeks. But as the doorbell rang suddenly, Max's body tensed. His ears flattened against his skull and he froze, his head lifting abruptly from her lap, eyes wide with alarm. His breath quickened, his muscles tensing in a familiar, instinctual reaction. He was ready to bolt, ready to retreat into the safety of the darkness where no one could touch him, where no one could hurt him. The woman felt it too, Max's sudden panic, his instinct to run. She had seen this before, the way he would react to loud noises, the way he would retreat when the world outside felt too big, too unpredictable. He had come so far, and yet the remnants of his past. Max's body was trembling now, his gaze fixed on the door, his tail tucked low, as if the weight of the world had come crashing down on him all over again. The woman immediately recognized the fear in his eyes, fear that had nothing to do with her, but everything to do with the shadows of his past. She knew he wasn't afraid of her. He was afraid of what might happen next. He was afraid of the unknown, afraid of the loud, chaotic world that had once betrayed him. "Sure, it's okay, Max," she whispered gently, reaching out to him. Her hand, which had once been an unknown, a symbol of something foreign and untrustworthy, was now a steady presence in his life. She let her hand hover near him, just within his reach, allowing him the space to decide whether or not he was ready to trust her touch. She didn't force it this time. She simply allowed him to breathe, to process, and to feel the security of her presence. It's just the doorbell. It's just someone at the door. Max's eyes darted between the door and the woman's face, his breathing still shallow, his body trembling. The noise had shaken him, had pulled him back into the dark recesses of his memory. His past, the one filled with abandonment, neglect, and confusion, was now a place he had to visit whenever the world became too overwhelming, too loud. It was the place where fear resided, the place where trust was broken, and it was hard for Max to let go of the trauma that had shaped him. But the woman didn't push him. She didn't try to force him to move or to calm down. She simply sat there with him, her voice soft and steady. "Hey, you're safe here, Max," she said again. A promise that she had made to him countless times, but one that she knew he needed to hear again and again. "You're not alone." Max's body trembled less now, but he was still watching the door. The woman reached down slowly and placed a hand on his back, her touch light but firm, a grounding presence. She didn't pull him into her lap or force him to sit closer. Instead, she let him make the choice, just as she always had. She trusted him to find his own way through the fear, to know that the choice to feel safe was his, not something that could be demanded of him. And slowly, inch by inch, Max began to settle. His muscles relaxed, the panic slowly dissipating as the doorbell became a distant sound once again. His tail, once tucked tightly between his legs, began to wag, though hesitantly, as if testing the waters. The doorbell rang again. This time, Max flinched, but he didn't bolt. He didn't retreat. He stayed, his body still tense but no longer rigid with fear. The woman's hands stayed on his back, gentle and constant. She kept talking to him in that soft, calm voice that had become his anchor. "It's okay. You're safe." The doorbell rang once more, and Max shifted slightly in response. He still wasn't completely comfortable, but there was a difference now. His response was slower, more measured. He wasn't reacting with the same desperation as before. This time, when he looked at the woman, his eyes were no longer filled with terror. There was still a flicker of uncertainty, of vulnerability, but there was also something new, something she hadn't seen in him before. It was hope. The smallest, quietest glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, the world outside wasn't so bad. That maybe, just maybe, the woman could be trusted to guide him through it. Max still had a long way to go. His recovery was not linear, and there would be many more moments like this. Moments where fear would seize him, moments when his past would come rushing back to haunt him. But the woman knew that it didn't matter how long it took. She would be there for him, every step of the way, holding his space, never forcing him to rush, but allowing him to move at his own pace. And in that moment, as Max's trembling subsided and he leaned into her touch, she knew this was only one chapter in his story of recovery. But it was a significant one. It was the first time he had chosen to face the fear, to stay in the present, to trust her. The road ahead was still uncertain, but the walls he had built, the ones forged from years of trauma and neglect, were starting to crumble. The journey wasn't over, but it had begun anew. The change in Max had become undeniable. No longer the broken, fearful dog he had once been, he now moved through the house with a newfound energy. His body was strong, his movements fluid, his fur gleamed in the sunlight that filtered through the windows, no longer marred by the sores that once covered his skin. Max had learned to run again, to leap and play, the weight of his past slowly giving way to the joy of the present. And yet, it wasn't just his body that had healed. It was his soul, his spirit, the part of him that had once been so shattered, now starting to shine through in ways that left the woman breathless. Max's transformation had been both physical and emotional. When she first found him, he was just a shell of a dog, his body ravaged by neglect and his mind closed off from any form of affection. But now, the dog she had taken into her home was more than just a survivor. He was thriving, living, and loving. And as she watched him run through the yard, tail wagging, ears perked with excitement, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. This wasn't just a victory for Max. It was a victory for them both. It was early morning, the sun just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden glow over the yard. The air was cool, crisp with the promise of a new day. Max was in his element, bounding around the grass, his body strong, his eyes bright with energy. His movements were no longer tentative or slow. He ran with the confidence of a dog who had rediscovered his purpose in life. It was a beautiful sight to behold, the kind of sight that made the woman's heart swell with pride. For the first time, Max was living without fear. Every jump, every sprint was a small celebration of the life he had almost lost. The woman stood on the porch, watching him, her heart full of emotion. She had come to love this dog more deeply than she could have ever imagined. And watching him now, so full of life and energy, she knew the journey they had taken together had been worth every challenge, every moment of doubt. But as the woman stood there, taking in the beauty of the moment, she was reminded that the road to healing was not a straight line. There were still shadows of Max's past that would never fully fade. The sound of a car zooming by too quickly, the sudden slam of a door, Max would flinch, his body tensing in response to the old triggers. There would still be moments when the fear of abandonment, the fear of being hurt again, would surface. The scars Max carried were not something that would ever completely disappear, but he had learned in his own quiet way that he could trust again, that he could live again. And so, as Max ran in circles, his joy uncontained, the woman let herself believe, really believe, that they were both on the path to a new beginning. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living, about thriving, about finding peace and joy despite the pain that had come before. This was a new chapter in both their lives, a chapter they would write together. Max's playful barks filled the air, the sound of pure joy and freedom. He had made it. Against all odds, he had found his way back from the brink of despair, and as the woman stepped off the porch and walked toward him, Max's tail wagged furiously, and he ran toward her, his body eager to meet hers. He didn't stop. He didn't hesitate. He ran to her because he knew, without a doubt, that she would be there. She always had been. When Max reached her, he stopped just short of her feet, looking up at her with those familiar, trusting eyes. His body was still as lean as it had been when she first found him, but his posture was different now. He was no longer the broken, abandoned dog. He was whole, strong, and full of life. He had become the dog he was always meant to be. And she, in turn, had become the person she was always meant to be. The one who saved him, the one who loved him, the one who gave him a second chance at life. She knelt down slowly, meeting Max at his level. She reached out her hand, and Max immediately nudged it with his nose, seeking the comfort he had learned to associate with her touch. He licked her hand briefly, a small gesture of affection, and she laughed softly, her heart overflowing with warmth. She had watched him struggle, watched him heal, and now, in this moment, she saw him for who he truly was, a survivor, a fighter, a creature who had learned to trust again. Max leaned against her, his body warm, his muscles relaxed, his tail wagging steadily. For the first time, the woman felt the weight of the past few months fall away from her. The doubts, the uncertainties, everything she had feared and questioned about their journey together had been worth it. Max was her companion now, her friend, her family, and she was his. They had come to depend on each other in ways she had never imagined. Together, they had healed. Together, they had found something beyond survival. They had found life. Together, in the truest sense. The future wasn't without its challenges. Max would still face moments of fear and doubt, but he had already shown that he was capable of so much more than anyone had believed. He had shown her that love could heal, that time could mend even the deepest wounds. And with each day that passed, their bond grew stronger, their connection deeper. The woman knew that there would be more to come, more walks, more moments of trust-building, more challenges to face. But for now, in this moment, she allowed herself to fully embrace the joy of what they had accomplished. They had reached a place where Max was free, not just from the pain that had once defined his life, but from the fear that had held him captive for so long. She stood up slowly, looking down at Max as he stood beside her. He looked up at her, his eyes full of love and gratitude, and in that look she saw the reflection of everything they had been through, everything they had fought for, and everything they had become. With a soft smile, she reached down and gently scratched behind his ears. "You did it," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Max gave a small, contented sigh, leaning into her touch. Together they had done it. They had both found something they hadn't realized they were missing, a home, a family, a future. And as they walked back inside the house, side by side, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one they would write together, one filled with trust, love, and a bond that would never be broken.